The rain fell in thin, silver threads across the city, making the cobblestones shimmer as if the streets themselves were alive. Lamps flickered in the fog, casting long, trembling shadows that danced along the walls of the grand buildings. In the tallest tower of the Blackthorn estate, a lone figure moved silently through the halls. Isla, with her dark hair tied neatly behind her, carried a stack of papers, her mind racing with deadlines and schedules. She had always known her boss was demanding, but tonight, something in the air felt different. He had summoned her to his office in a way that made her pulse quicken. Lucian Blackthorn sat behind an enormous desk carved from ebony, his hands folded and his gaze fixed on the city below. The storm outside mirrored the intensity of his dark eyes. Lucian was known throughout the city, not just for his wealth but for the air of mystery that surrounded him. Rumors clung to his name. Some whispered of curses, others of old dangerous deals, and yet Isla had always dismissed them as idle gossip. "Until tonight, Isla," he said, his voice low, smooth, almost a whisper that could draw a person in against their will. "I need you to do something unusual." She set the papers down on the polished surface, her fingers brushing the cold wood. "Of course, sir." "What is it?" He leaned back in his chair, his eyes narrowing as if weighing her very soul. "I want you to pretend to be my fiancé." The word struck her like a sudden chill. Pretend. Her heartbeat stuttered, and she had to remind herself to breathe. She had known Lucian was unpredictable, even controlling, but this was something entirely different. "My fiancé?" Her voice was barely above a whisper. "Yes," he said, leaning forward slightly, so close that she could see the faint scars on his hands and the way his knuckles were tense. "There's an event, a gala, a meeting with the Montclair family. They expect me to be married, and I cannot have them interfering with my affairs. You will act as my betrothed. You will smile, you will converse, and you will play the part perfectly." Isla opened her mouth, then closed it, struggling to form words. She wanted to protest, to argue that this was impossible, but something in Lucian's gaze, intense, commanding, yet faintly vulnerable, made her hesitate. "And why me?" she finally asked, her voice steadier than she felt. Lucian's eyes softened for a fleeting moment, a look that passed in a heartbeat. "Because you are clever. You are careful. And you understand boundaries better than anyone else. You can survive this charade, and perhaps even help me survive it too." Isla felt a shiver run down her spine. Survive. The word seemed heavier than usual, laden with meaning she could not fully comprehend. She began, but her words faltered. "You will say yes," Lucian interrupted gently, though there was no mistaking the authority in his tone. "I cannot do this alone. You understand?" She nodded slowly, her thoughts a tangle of fear and curiosity. Pretending to be his fiancé meant stepping into his world, into the world that seemed to hum with danger and secrets. She had always been careful, meticulous, and private, but now she was being asked to enter a life where every step might be a test and every glance could hide a hidden truth. "Very well," she said, her voice quiet but resolute. "I'll do it." Lucian leaned back in his chair again, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his lips, but it did not reach his eyes entirely. There was something unreadable there, a darkness that seemed to swirl just beneath the surface. "You do not yet know what you are stepping into," he murmured, almost to himself. Isla felt her stomach twist, a mixture of excitement and dread. She had never known Lucian to speak so softly, as if speaking aloud was dangerous, and yet she could not look away. The evening passed in a blur. Lucian explained the details of the gala, the importance of appearances and the fragile political alliances at stake. He spoke of the Montclairs with a mixture of disdain and caution, as if their wealth was a veil for something much darker. Isla listened carefully, memorizing names, faces, and roles, but her mind kept wandering to the strange intensity of Lucien's presence. After the meeting, she left his office, her thoughts heavy. The corridors of the estate were dimly lit, and the storm outside had grown fiercer. Rain lashed against the windows, wind howling like a creature searching for prey. As she walked back to her own quarters, she thought of Lucian, alone behind the massive doors of his office, and wondered what shadows haunted him. Later that night, sleep eluded her. She could not shake the memory of his gaze, the way his voice had seemed both commanding and vulnerable. Her thoughts kept returning to the word he had used. Survive. Survive what? And why did she feel as if the answer mattered to her? As if her own fate had been tied to his in ways she could not yet understand. The next morning, Isla arrived at the office early. Lucian was already there, standing by the window, looking out over the city as though it were a chessboard and he was plotting every move. He did not turn when she entered. "You're punctual," he said without turning, his voice carrying the same quiet authority as before. "That will serve you well. Tonight we begin our pretense." Isla swallowed her nerves. "And the gala?" He finally turned to her, the intensity of his gaze making her heart pound. "The gala is only the beginning. What happens there will determine everything." She nodded, unsure of what he meant, but sensing the gravity of his words. "Before tonight," he continued, "there is something you must understand. In my world, appearances are everything, and yet appearances are often deceiving. Trust is fragile, alliances are fragile, and even the smallest misstep can invite ruin." "I understand," Isla said, though she felt she understood very little. Lucian's lips curved into a faint, almost imperceptible smile. "Good. Because you will not only act as my fiancée, Isla, you will also walk beside me through shadows that others dare not enter. And in these shadows, the truth about me, about who I truly am, will reveal itself." Isla's chest tightened. She had never felt fear and curiosity mix in such a potent way. She realized with a quiet shock that she did not want to turn away from him even as every instinct screamed caution. The office door creaked, breaking the heavy silence. Lucian moved to close it, but Isla noticed out of the corner of her eye a flicker of movement in the shadows. Something alive, almost human, but not entirely. She blinked and it was gone, leaving only the dim glow of the storm outside. Lucian noticed her glance. His expression did not change, but there was a flicker of something, warning, amusement, that she could not decipher. "Do not be afraid of shadows," he said softly, "but never forget they can reach farther than you imagine." Isla's stomach twisted. She wanted to ask what he meant, but the words lodged in her throat. Instead, she nodded, feeling the weight of a world she had only glimpsed in rumors and whispers settle over her shoulders. The day passed in a haze of preparation. Lucian's instructions were precise, every gesture and word accounted for. Isla followed them obediently, but she could not shake the sense that she was stepping into a world she barely understood, a world where power and danger walked hand in hand. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the estate transformed. Candles flickered in sconces, shadows stretched long and sharp across the walls, and the wind howled through the stone corridors like a warning. Lucian stood at the head of the grand staircase waiting, his dark coat brushing the steps. Isla approached him, her heart pounding in her chest. "I'm ready," she said. He nodded, his expression unreadable. "Then let us begin." Together they stepped into the stormy night, the city glowing beneath them like a world on fire. Isla could not know what awaited her at the gala, what secrets would be revealed or what darkness lingered just beyond sight. But for the first time she felt a strange certainty. Her life was about to change forever, and Lucian Blackthorne was at the center of it. And in the shadows behind the estate, something stirred, watching, patient, and alive. The night air was thick with rain and the distant hum of the city. Isla's shoes clicked against the marble floor as she followed Lucian through the ornate halls of the Montclair estate. She could hear the soft echo of her heartbeat, each step pulling her deeper into a world she had only glimpsed from the edges. Tonight she was no longer an assistant. Tonight she was a fiancée, pretending to belong to a man whose secrets were as dark as the storm clouds above. Lucian's hand brushed hers ever so slightly as he guided her through the grand entrance, and she felt a jolt of awareness she could not name. His grip was firm, controlled, and yet strangely comforting, like he anchored her in a sea of uncertainty. The Montclair ballroom unfolded before them in a blaze of candlelight and gold, a sea of masks and glittering gowns, laughter and whispers blending together like music that hummed under the skin. "Remember," Lucian murmured in her ear, his breath warm against her cheek. "We are to be perfect. Every word, every glance, every gesture matters." Isla swallowed hard and nodded, though her stomach twisted with nerves. She had rehearsed polite smiles and casual conversation in her head, but nothing had prepared her for the sight of the Montclairs themselves. They were elegant, calculating, and cold, moving like predators beneath the chandeliers. Every guest seemed to watch, every masked face measuring her, and she felt as if invisible eyes were piercing through her very soul. Lucian guided her to the center of the room. The Montclair patriarch stepped forward, his gaze sharp, appraising. "Lucian Blackthorn," he said, his voice smooth but edged with challenge. "And this must be your bride-to-be." Isla lifted her chin and forced a polite smile, her hands clasped delicately in front of her. She could feel Lucian's presence beside her like a shield, his aura radiating control and confidence. Yet beneath it she sensed tension, a flicker of something she could not name. The patriarch's eyes lingered on Lucian, then flicked to Isla, as if weighing her worth. "Charming," he said at last, his voice measured. "I trust this engagement is sincere." Lucian's smile was polite, but his gaze was sharp. "Sincere enough for appearances, sir," he said smoothly, and Isla could feel the undercurrent of power in his words. There was no warmth, only precision, and she realized then that this man wielded influence like a blade, sharp, cold, and dangerous. The evening passed in a blur of conversation and carefully measured gestures. Isla followed Lucian's lead, answering questions with practiced poise, laughing when appropriate, nodding when necessary. But all the while her eyes kept darting to him, noticing the small details, the faint shadow beneath his eyes, the way his jaw tensed when someone questioned him, the subtle hand movements that seemed to hold invisible threads of control. During a pause in the music, Isla felt someone watching her from across the room. A figure in a black mask lingered near the balcony, their presence unnerving yet strangely familiar. She tried to focus on Lucian, on the gala, but her gaze kept being drawn back to that figure. Lucian noticed her distraction. He leaned close, his voice barely audible over the soft music. "Do not let your attention wander. There are eyes in this room that see more than they should." Her throat tightened. I saw someone, a masked guest." He glanced in the direction she indicated, his expression unreadable. "Let it be," he said finally. "Not all shadows move against us. Some merely wait, and some serve as warnings." Isla shivered. The words were cryptic, and yet they carried a weight she could feel in her bones. Lucian had a world she could not touch, a darkness she could not fully understand. And yet she could not turn away. Later, as the night grew deeper, the music softened and the guests began pairing off for dances. Lucian extended his hand to her and she placed hers in it, feeling the warmth of his grip. The dance began, slow and deliberate, moving them across the floor with a grace that seemed effortless. "You are doing well," he murmured, his lips close to her ear. "Do not fear. Confidence will carry you further than skill." Isla nodded, her pulse quickening. She could feel the heat of his body, the subtle power in his movements, and something in her chest stirred. Fear mixed with fascination, trepidation blended with curiosity. She was walking a line between admiration and caution, and she did not know which would win. As the dance ended, a sudden chill swept through the ballroom. The candles flickered and a shadow passed over the floor, dark and unnatural. Isla's gaze went to the balcony, and there, standing apart from the masked guests, was the same figure she had seen earlier. But now their presence seemed heavier, more menacing. Lucian's eyes narrowed. He did not speak, but the air around him shifted. It was as if the shadows themselves recognized him, as if some unseen force was stirring at his presence. "Who is that?" Isla asked quietly, her voice trembling. "Someone from my past," Lucian said finally, his jaw tight. "A ghost best left undisturbed." Isla wanted to ask more, but the words died in her throat. There was a finality in his tone that made her heart ache, a warning and a confession wrapped into one. She realized then that Lucien's life was far more complicated, far darker than she had ever imagined. The night ended with polite farewells and carefully measured bows. The Montclairs did not question her further, but Isla sensed their scrutiny did not fade with distance. Once they were alone, walking back through the rain-soaked streets to the Blackthorn estate, the tension between them shifted. Lucien's hand brushed hers again, and this time there was no pretense, only a quiet intensity that made her chest ache. "Tonight was revealing," Isla said softly, her eyes on the pavement. "I saw shadows. I saw things that I don't understand." Lucien's gaze met hers, sharp and unflinching. "You saw what many cannot," he said. "And that is why I chose you. You are cautious, perceptive, alive in ways that matter." Her heart skipped a beat. She had expected manipulation, distance, or even cold indifference, but in his words there was something else. A flicker of honesty, a trace of vulnerability hidden behind the armor of wealth and power. "Why me?" she whispered. Lucian's expression softened just enough to reveal a fleeting truth. "Because, Isla, you see more than others, and because you are not afraid of what you might find." She looked away, feeling a warmth in her chest that she could not name. Fear, curiosity, attraction, they all mixed into a cocktail that made her pulse quicken. But beneath it, a small voice whispered caution. Lucian was a man surrounded by shadows, a man who held secrets that could unravel everything. As they reached the estate, the storm began to subside, leaving only the soft patter of rain on the rooftops. Lucian opened the door for her and she stepped inside, the warm light of the mansion contrasting sharply with the chill outside. "You should rest," he said, his tone commanding yet gentle. "Tomorrow the real work begins. And not just at the gala. There are complications, shadows that do not sleep, and alliances that must be managed carefully." Ela nodded, though her mind swirled with questions she dared not voice. She had entered this arrangement thinking it would be simple, a matter of appearances and polite deception. But tonight had shown her otherwise. Lucian's world was layered, dangerous, and intoxicating. Before retiring to her room, she paused at the staircase, glancing back at Lucian. He stood by the window looking out over the city, a figure of power and mystery bathed in the dim glow of candlelight. For a moment she felt as if she glimpsed the truth hidden beneath his careful exterior. A man both formidable and haunted, struggling against shadows she could not yet name. As she climbed the stairs to her quarters, Isla could not shake the feeling that she was being watched. The shadows of the estate seemed to shift, almost alive, and a flicker of movement caught her eye in the dim light of the hallway. She stopped, holding her breath, but saw nothing, only the soft echo of her footsteps, yet the sense of unease remained. Lucien's words, the masked figure at the gala, and the shadows that seemed to follow him everywhere. They were pieces of a puzzle she did not yet understand. And deep in her heart she realized that the story she had walked into tonight was only beginning. Something in the storm, in the shadows, in Lucian himself, whispered a warning. This life would test her, change her, and pull her into a darkness she could not yet imagine. And for reasons she could not explain, she did not want to turn away. The morning light filtered through tall windows of the Blackthorn estate, painting the grand halls in muted gold. Isla walked quietly, her footsteps soft on the marble floors, her mind still tangled in the events of the previous night. The gala, the masked figure, Lucian's intensity, it all lingered like smoke, leaving her uneasy yet strangely drawn. She had been told to pretend, to act, to play a role, but now she felt as if the line between her life and Lucian's world was already blurring. Lucian stood by the window in his study, looking out over the city with a distant gaze. His black coat hung loosely over his shoulders, yet the presence of power in his posture was undeniable. When he saw Isla, his dark eyes shifted to her, sharp and unreadable, yet softened by a hint of concern. "Good morning," Isla said softly, stepping inside. "Good morning," Lucian replied, his voice low, almost melodic. "I trust last night did not overwhelm you." Isla hesitated. It was intense. There were shadows I could not understand, people watching, things that felt dangerous." Lucian's expression darkened ever so slightly. He gestured for her to sit in the chair across from his desk. "You saw only the surface. There is more beneath, always more. Shadows follow me, not just at events, but in life. And they are not idle. They watch, they wait, and they test those around me." Isla swallowed, her heart tightening. She had heard whispers, rumors about Lucian's past, about dark dealings and whispered curses, but she had never imagined the weight of them. "Shadows? Are you saying you are cursed?" she asked carefully, her voice barely above a whisper. Lucian leaned back, his eyes distant. "Perhaps. Some call it a curse. Others call it destiny. I call it a burden." Isla felt a chill. A burden he carried alone, yet somehow it had reached out into the world around him, brushing against her already. What does it mean?" "It means," Lucian said, his voice hardening, "that my life is not entirely my own. There are forces at work that do not forgive mistakes, that test loyalty, courage, and at times love." Isla's chest tightened. The words sounded like a warning, and yet there was something in them that pulled her closer. She realized she was no longer merely playing a role in his life. She was stepping into it, willingly or not. The morning passed in a tense silence, broken only by the occasional rustle of papers or the distant roll of thunder. Lucian handed her a small leather-bound notebook. "I want you to keep this," he said. "Take notes, remember names, alliances, and patterns. They are easier to see when written down." Isla took it, her fingers brushing his as she accepted it. For a moment their eyes met, and she felt a jolt of warmth that she could not explain. He noticed it too, but did not comment. Instead, he turned back to the window, his face shadowed by both the morning light and the weight he carried. By late afternoon, Lucian led her to a hidden part of the estate, a library she had never known existed. The walls were lined with ancient tomes, dust thick on the spines, and the air smelled of old paper and secrets. "This is where I study," he said. "Where I plan, where I confront what follows me." Isla's eyes scanned the room, taking in shelves of books whose titles were written in languages she did not know. Symbols and diagrams were etched into the margins of some pages, strange shapes that seemed alive in the flickering candlelight. Lucian moved to a large table and opened a book bound in black leather. "This," he said, pointing to the page, "contains the history of what haunts me. It is old, centuries old, a lineage of shadows binding power and consequence together." Isla leaned closer, drawn by both curiosity and caution. "So, the rumors are true," she said softly. "It is real." He nodded slowly. "Yes, and it is not just power. It is danger, to me, to those I care for, to anyone who stands close enough." Her hands trembled slightly, but she forced herself to remain composed. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because," Lucian said, his voice low, "you are now part of my life. You are involved whether you realize it or not. And if you wish to survive this charade, to navigate my world, you must understand it." The shadows do not forgive ignorance. Isla's mind raced. She had entered this arrangement thinking it was merely a pretense, a role she could play, but now she saw the truth. Lucian was a man bound by forces beyond comprehension, and his life was a battlefield of power, secrets, and darkness. I want to help," she said finally, her voice steady despite the fear in her chest. "I want to understand. I want to be there if you'll let me." Lucian studied her, his gaze piercing as if weighing her soul. Then slowly he nodded. "Very well. But know this, understanding comes at a cost. And sometimes the cost is more than one can bear." The evening came, heavy with mist and quiet tension. They walked through the city to a secluded garden behind the estate, where Lucian paused beside a fountain carved from black marble. The water shimmered in the dim light, casting reflections that seemed to twist and dance with life of their own. "Sit," he said, gesturing to a bench nearby. Isla obeyed, her eyes fixed on the swirling water. "What is this place?" she asked. "It is a place of reflection," Lucian said. "A place where I watch, plan, and sometimes confront what lies within me. Shadows take many forms. Some are external, some are internal. Tonight you will see the latter." Isla felt a flicker of fear, but also a strange sense of anticipation. She did not know what he meant, but she sensed the truth would be revealed here, away from the world, away from masks and whispered expectations. Lucian stepped closer to the fountain, his reflection dark in the water. He muttered words under his breath, soft, rhythmic, like a chant. Isla watched, fascinated and uneasy. The air seemed to thicken around him, shadows lengthening as if drawn to his presence. Suddenly, a shape rose from the water, a shadowy form that flickered and twisted, its edges uncertain, its presence undeniable. Isla gasped and took a step back, but Lucian's hand shot out, steadying her. "Do not be afraid," he said. "It is not here to harm you." "Yet, but you must see. You must understand." The shadow moved, circling him, coiling like smoke around a flame. Lucian's eyes followed it calmly, and yet a tension ran through his body, subtle but unmistakable. "This is my curse," he said quietly. "A power that binds me, a force that tests my control. It is a part of me, and yet it is separate. It is a darkness I cannot fully escape." Isla's chest tightened. The stories, the rumors, the whispers, they were real. Lucian was bound to something ancient, something alive, and yet he faced it with courage, with determination, and now, with her by his side. "Why me?" she asked again, her voice trembling. "Why show me this?" "Because," he said, turning to her, his eyes dark and intense, "you are brave enough to see the truth. And because I trust you more than anyone else." "The shadows test me, Isla. They do not forgive weakness, but they also reveal strength. I need you to see both sides of me if we are to survive what comes next." Her hand brushed his as she stepped closer, a gesture of silent support. I will be here. I will help you." For the first time, a faint smile tugged at the corners of Lucian's lips. "You are stronger than you know," he said. "And perhaps that is why the shadows have noticed you already." Isla looked at him, uncertainty and determination mingling in her chest. The darkness surrounding Lucian was immense, ancient, and consuming, yet she felt drawn to him, compelled to stay. She realized then that this was no longer just pretense, this was her life now, entwined with his in ways she could not yet understand. As they stood in the garden, the wind carried a whisper from the shadows, soft and almost human. Isla shivered, sensing a presence beyond their sight, a reminder that the world was larger, darker, and more dangerous than she had imagined. Lucien's hand found hers, steadying her once more. "Whatever comes," he said quietly, "we face it together. But know this, love and danger walk closely in my world. Trust is a weapon and hope is fragile." Isla nodded, her heart pounding. She did not fully understand, and yet she knew she would not turn away. The shadows were real, the curse was real, and Lucian's life was a storm she had willingly stepped into. And somewhere in the dark corners of the estate, unseen eyes watched, waiting, calculating. The night was far from over, and the true test of courage, trust, and the bond forming between them had only just begun. The night fell heavy over the city, cloaking streets and alleys in a thick, misty darkness. Inside the Blackthorn estate, Lucian moved like a shadow himself, silent and purposeful. Isla followed close behind, her heart pounding. The past days had been a whirlwind of rehearsed smiles, whispered warnings, and glimpses of a world that felt both enchanting and dangerous. Yet tonight was different. Tonight the shadows were restless, alive in ways that made even Lucienne tense. Lucienne led her to a hidden courtyard behind the estate, a place she had never seen before. Stone statues of long-forgotten figures lined the edges, their faces weathered and cold, watching over the space with silent judgment. The moonlight poured through the clouds in fractured beams, casting uneven patterns across the cobblestones. "This is where the curse manifests most strongly," Lucian said quietly, his gaze scanning the courtyard. "It is a place between worlds where shadows gather and power tests even the strongest." Isla's stomach twisted. She had known Lucian was different, that there were dangers surrounding him, but the words carried weight she could almost feel pressing against her chest. "Tests? What kind of tests?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Lucian's eyes darkened. "The kind that measure control, courage, and trust. The shadows can twist, manipulate, and tempt. They exploit fear, doubt, and weakness, and if one is careless, the consequences are severe." As if on cue, a gust of wind swept through the courtyard, rattling the statues and sending shivers down Isla's spine. The shadows along the edges seemed to stretch unnaturally, coiling like living tendrils. She stepped back instinctively, clutching the notebook Lucian had given her. Lucian placed a steadying hand on her shoulder. "Do not be afraid. You are here to see, to learn, and to support. But remember, the darkness reacts to more than presence. It reacts to hesitation, doubt, and fear. Stand firm, Isla." She nodded, taking a deep breath. The cool night air filled her lungs, and she forced herself to step closer, matching his calm, though every instinct in her body screamed caution. Then it happened. The shadows moved. At first it was subtle, a flicker in the corner of her eye, a wisp of darkness along the stone walls. Then they surged, coalescing into forms that resembled smoke, twisting and writhing as if alive. They circled Lucien, probing, testing him, their presence oppressive. Lucien's eyes narrowed. He muttered words under his breath, gestures precise and controlled as though guiding invisible threads. The shadows reacted, moving faster, curling and twisting more violently but failing to breach his control entirely. Isla watched, captivated and terrified. The shadows were beautiful and terrible at the same time, dancing like living smoke, reflecting the moonlight in fleeting glimpses of silver and black. She felt her chest tighten, not from fear alone, but from the knowledge that Lucian was balancing life and danger with every breath, and that he trusted her to witness it. Suddenly, one of the shadow forms lunged toward Lucian, striking with a force that made the air shiver. He reacted instantly, countering with a whispered incantation, and the shadow recoiled, hissing like a wounded creature. But in that instant, Isla saw something in him falter, a flicker of strain that made her heart race. "Lucienne!" she exclaimed, stepping forward. He glanced at her, his eyes intense but calm. "Stay back," he said firmly. "It will test you soon enough." Isla hesitated, but she did not move away. She realized then that fear alone would not define her role in this world. If she wanted to be part of Lucien's life, if she wanted to protect him, she would have to face the darkness with him, not apart from him. The shadows surged again, larger this time, twisting into forms that resembled ghostly figures from long ago. They moved closer, curling around Lucien like smoke around a flame, testing his focus and control. For the first time, she saw his hands shake slightly as he struggled to maintain command over the swirling darkness. "It is stronger tonight," Lucien muttered, his voice strained. "The curse reacts to presence and perhaps to emotions." Isla's gaze met his and she understood. He feared losing control, feared that the darkness could hurt her or destroy everything he had built. Without thinking, she stepped forward, placing a hand over his. "Lucien," she said softly, "you are not alone. You are not fighting this by yourself." His eyes widened for a moment, caught off guard by her courage, her willingness to stand beside him. Then slowly he nodded, grounding himself through her touch. Together they faced the shadows, their presence a combined force that neither had fully anticipated. The dark forms recoiled slightly, confused by their unity, then surged again, more violently than before. Lucien's lips moved in a low chant, gestures sharp, his control renewed but demanding every ounce of energy. Isla's grip on his hand tightened, offering support, strength, and presence. She realized then that courage was not just facing fear. It was standing with someone through it and trusting that bond to hold them steady. Hours passed like moments. The storm outside raged, lightning flashing across the courtyard, thunder rolling through the city. But inside the circle of their attention, the shadows began to wane. Their movements became slower, less certain until finally they dissipated, retreating into the corners of the courtyard like smoke retreating to its source. Lucien sank to his knees, exhaustion evident in the way his shoulders slumped. Isla knelt beside him, her hand still over his. "You did it," she said softly. "You controlled them." He shook his head slightly. "Not entirely. The shadows will always be part of me. But tonight, you helped me anchor myself. You gave me strength I could not have summoned alone." Isla's heart fluttered. She had never imagined herself part of something so dangerous, so ancient, and yet, here she was, standing beside the man who carried such a burden. She realized then that her feelings for him were no longer simple admiration or curiosity. They were something deeper, something tied to the respect and trust that had formed between them. Lucien looked at her, his dark eyes intense, searching. "You stayed," he said quietly. "Even knowing the risk, that means more than you understand." "I wanted to help," she replied, her voice steady. "I wanted to be here with you." A long silence stretched between them, filled with unspoken words and emotions. The wind swept through the courtyard, and the statues seemed to lean closer as if observing the connection forming between them. Lucien reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "You are stronger than most," he said softly, "and braver than you know. If you remain at my side, I will do my best to keep you safe. But understand this, my world is not forgiving. Shadows linger, old enemies awaken, and danger follows my every step. Nothing about this life is simple." "I know," Isla said, "but I am not afraid. Not with you." For a moment, the intensity between them hung like the tension before a storm. The darkness of Lucien's world pressed in from every side. Yet in that courtyard, in the middle of shadows and moonlight, something fragile and luminous began to grow. A bond built on trust, courage, and the knowledge that they were stronger together than apart. Then, from the far corner of the courtyard, a subtle movement caught Isla's eye. A shadow detached itself from the others, smaller, slower, yet deliberate. It moved toward them with a purpose that made her stomach tighten. Lucien noticed it instantly. His expression hardened. "It is not done," he said. "The test is not over. The shadows, they never rest." Isla gripped his hand tighter, drawing courage from his presence and giving strength in return. "Then we face it," she said firmly. "Together." Lucian's gaze softened, a flicker of something almost human breaking through the dark intensity. Together, he agreed. The shadow advanced, coiling around them like smoke seeking a flame. And as it drew nearer, Isla realized something important. Fear could not guide them. Control could not protect them alone. Only trust in each other, trust in their bond, would allow them to survive what was coming next. And in the depths of the night, with the storm still raging and the shadows still alive, Isla knew that their journey had reached a new, more dangerous phase. One that would test every ounce of courage, every thread of trust, and every emotion they had yet to understand. The storm had passed, leaving the city drenched in a quiet silver light as dawn crept across the horizon. The Blackthorn estate felt heavier than usual, shadows lingering in corners where morning light rarely reached. Isla and Lucian stood in the grand courtyard, their hands clasped, hearts synchronized in ways that defied explanation. The events of the night before had changed everything. Shadows had tested them, fear had been confronted, and bonds had been forged in fire. Lucien's dark eyes swept over the courtyard, searching for the final remnants of the curse that haunted him. "It should be gone," he said cautiously, "at least for now. But the shadows, they are patient. They wait even when unseen." Isla nodded, though unease lingered in her chest. "I feel it," she admitted quietly. "Like they're watching even now." "They are," Lucian said, a shadow of a smile touching his lips. "Always, but today we showed them something new. Strength and trust together." The courtyard was quiet, yet the air hummed with tension. Then slowly a movement caught their attention. A figure emerged from the mist, tall, cloaked in black, its face hidden. It was the last shadow from the previous night, more defined, more deliberate. It did not move like the others. It carried purpose, intelligence, and an unmistakable threat. Lucian's hand tightened around Isla's. "This is the final test," he said softly. "Face it with me, or it will strike alone and we may not survive its judgment." Isla met his gaze, her heart steady despite the fear. "I will not leave you," she said firmly. "We face it together." The shadow advanced, coiling around them like smoke seeking to consume. Lucian began his incantations, words low and precise, gestures intricate and controlled. Yet this shadow was different, older, sharper, aware. It reacted faster, forcing him to stretch his power to its limit. Isla felt the tension in his grip, the strain in his stance, and without hesitation, she placed her free hand over his. The warmth of their touch seemed to anchor him, lending strength where he faltered. The shadow hissed, recoiling slightly as if surprised by their unity. "You are stronger than I imagined," Lucian whispered, his voice strained but steady. "Do not let fear control you. Let trust guide us." The shadows surged again, twisting into forms of long-lost figures from Lucian's past, echoing faces of betrayal, loss, and pain. Lucian's eyes flickered with sorrow, and Isla realized the curse was not just a force, it was memory, regret, and suffering made manifest. "You have lived too long with this alone," Isla said softly. "But no more, not now, not with me here." Her words seemed to ripple through the courtyard. The shadow faltered, the forms wavered, and for the first time the darkness hesitated. Lucian's hands moved faster, more assured, drawing patterns in the air that seemed to bind the shadows, holding them at bay. "You see," he said, his voice low and urgent. "Together we are more than fear, more than darkness." The shadow screamed, a sound like wind through broken glass, and surged toward them one last time. Isla stepped forward, drawing on every ounce of courage she possessed. "We will not be afraid," she cried, her voice clear and strong. Lucian's eyes met hers, and in that moment a silent understanding passed between them. He drew all the power he could, channeling it with precision and determination, while she lent him her courage, her presence, her unwavering trust. Together they formed a bond stronger than the curse, brighter than the shadows, and the darkness shrieked as it began to unravel. Light flared from the center of their clasped hands, spreading outward, washing over the courtyard in pure silver brilliance. The shadow writhed, twisting and contorting, then dissolved into nothingness, leaving only silence in its wake. The air was still, the mist dissipating, and the oppressive weight that had hung over the estate lifted, if only slightly. Lucian sank to his knees, exhausted, but Isla knelt beside him, her hand steady on his arm. "It's over," she said softly. "At least for now." He looked at her, his dark eyes shining with gratitude, relief, and something deeper, something unspoken. "You faced it with me," he said quietly. "You did not flinch. You saved me from more than the shadows. You saved me from myself." Isla's heart fluttered. "And you saved me," she replied. "From fear, from doubt, from thinking I could not handle this world." Lucien's lips curved into a rare, genuine smile. "Then we have both changed. Together." They stood in the quiet courtyard, the morning sun now spilling across the stones, casting long shadows that no longer felt threatening. The curse had not vanished entirely. It was part of Lucien, a legacy of darkness. But for the first time it had been tempered by trust, courage, and connection. As they walked back into the estate, Lucien's hand remained over Isla's, their steps synchronized in unspoken harmony. The halls, once oppressive and heavy with secrets, seemed lighter, the air easier to breathe. They reached his study, where the morning light painted the room in gold, and for a moment they simply stood there, looking at one another. "You must know," Lucien said finally, his voice low, "that the darkness will always return, but now we are ready for it. Together nothing will break us, and perhaps one day even the curse itself can be healed." Isla's fingers brushed against his. "Then we face whatever comes side by side. Always." Lucien nodded, a depth of emotion in his eyes that words could not capture. "Always," he echoed. Days passed and the estate slowly returned to its rhythm. Guests came and went. Masks and polite smiles resumed, but between Isla and Lucien a bond had formed that was unshakable. They worked together seamlessly, a partnership built on trust, understanding, and shared strength. The shadows no longer felt like an insurmountable threat. They were challenges to face, together with courage and determination. Yet even in moments of peace, Isla could feel the lingering presence of the curse, subtle and patient. She understood now that life with Lucien would never be ordinary, but the fear that had once gripped her heart had transformed into resolve. One evening, as the sun set in hues of crimson and gold, Lucien took Isla to the balcony overlooking the estate gardens. The air was warm, scented with blooming flowers, and the city below was quiet. "Almost serene, Isla," he said, turning to her, his expression serious yet soft. "You entered my world knowing little of its darkness. You stayed, you fought, and you believed in me when it was hardest to do so. I owe you more than gratitude." Isla's heart fluttered. "You gave me trust," she said softly, "and courage, and perhaps something more." Lucien's hand found hers, fingers intertwining. "Yes," he said quietly, "something more. I was lost in shadows, burdened by a curse I thought I could bear alone. But now I see that I am not alone, and because of you I am more than I was. I'm stronger, freer, and capable of something I never thought I could feel again." Isla's eyes filled with emotion, and for the first time, she let herself lean closer to him, her trust complete. "Then we face the future together," she whispered, "whatever it holds." Lucien drew her into a gentle embrace, the warmth of his presence banishing any lingering shadows of fear. "Together," he agreed, his voice low and certain, echoing with promise. For the first time, Isla felt truly at home, not just in the grand halls of the Blackthorn estate, but in the world Lucien inhabited, a world of shadows and power, danger and beauty, darkness and light. And most importantly, she felt at home in his presence, in the bond they had forged through trials, courage, and unwavering trust. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of rose and amber, they stood together on the balcony, hands entwined, hearts united. The shadows may linger, the curse may return, but they had faced it and they had triumphed together. In the quiet of the evening, with the city asleep below and the stars beginning to twinkle above, Lucien whispered, "We have survived the shadows, Isla, and now, perhaps we can find the light." Isla smiled, her heart full. "The light," she echoed, "is wherever we are, together." And as the night embraced them for the first time, the darkness no longer felt threatening. It was simply a part of the world they had conquered together, a reminder of the trials they had faced, and the love that had grown between them, a love tempered by courage, forged in shadows and destined to endure.